The manosphere is most certainly an interesting constellation. It has its many factions. It has MGTOW, it has PUAs, it has MRAs. Some might argue whether or not incels are part of that. But regardless, there seem to be two tendencies that are prominent in the manosphere as a whole. One tendency is to look at small-scale phenomena, you could say micro-phenomena, usually anecdotal stories, anecdotal experiences, and on the other extreme, look at macro-scale phenomena. By that I mean hypergamy, divorce rates, etc., etc. And generally speaking, the two are woven together to create a coherent picture of the world that helps add lucidity and a bit of clarity to an otherwise very confusing situation, as it tends to be the case with men and women. And I am just as guilty as anyone else is. In fact, if I were to be completely honest, before I got into evolutionary psychology, before I got into the macro phenomena, virtually all of my experience, by necessity, of course, were anecdotal experiences that I later applied to macro-scale phenomena, and then that gave me a much more coherent picture of the world and helped aid me in evaluating my thoughts and my analyses. And I don't think there's anything wrong with this. I've done this, and this is the general approach that you'll find in the manosphere, looking at micro-phenomena, macro-phenomena, and putting them together. But one thing I think is somewhat lacking, and again, I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, is looking at what I might refer to as mesophenomena. Now, that is not the traditional use of that word. In fact, it probably doesn't exist per se, but by that I mean things in the middle. So on the one hand, we have very well-defined, I would say very robust and rigorous ideas about how women operate in a general sense, how they operate in terms of civilization, what the main drivers are, how they operate in the context of marriage, what their reproductive strategies are, etc., etc. That's pretty clear by now to virtually anyone. There are some details that are missing here and there, particularly in the more widespread commercialized forms of MGTOW, but that is definitely there. And so we have a good grasp of that, I would say. And of course, we also have tons of anecdotes. And these anecdotes in their totality oftentimes build up to these macro-scale paradigms I've been referring to. But again, things in the middle, behaviors that are universal to women are well known, or nigh universal, not so much when it comes to other things, things that do exist that you can encounter, that some men have confronted, but are not universal. But I still think, and this is why I'm making this video, they're worth mentioning, they're worth talking about. So in this video I want to talk about the phenomenon of love bombing. And I should say at the outset, before I get into the topic of love bombing, that love bombing is not unique to women on men. Men do it to women too, but for a few reasons. I'm going to be concentrating almost entirely on the love bombing phenomenon in the context of women applying it to men, or women engaging this type of behavior with respect to men, even though I concede, yes, it exists on the other end of the spectrum too. And there are a few reasons for this. One, my primary concern, in as much as I talk about manosphere-related issues, has always been men. I make no secret of the fact that I will offer preference to the welfare of men over women, and the formula for that is quite simple, to me at least. I've said this publicly. Everywhere I look, women get a leg up. Everywhere I look, women receive advantages. Everywhere I look, there are white knights helping women out. I mean, women have enough help. So given this context, I try to help men, and I try to prioritize helping them and making sure they're okay over women, not because I wish suffering upon women, but simply because they have enough help, and men need it too. The other reason I want to focus on love bombing in the context of women applying it to men is because I'm going to go into some personal definitions in addition to the more general stuff, wherein I will offer a paradigm of love bombing which is divided into two types. You could say hard love bombing and soft love bombing, and I will explain that in due course. And the third reason I'm making this video is simply the fact that I have to acknowledge that while I personally am abstemious with regards to women, and many men are in MGTOW and elsewhere, not every man is going to abstain from female contact. And indeed, most men are going to engage with women, and inasmuch as they are, they should be well prepared. They should be aware of the general macro scale phenomena as well as the micro scale stuff, but also these somewhat rarer behavioral types that they can encounter. And with that said, let me get into love bombing. Love bombing, in a general sense, is the tactic that some people, in this case females, use, although it does apply to men too, but in this case, females use to overwhelm the person they're together with feelings of attachment. And they do this by offering compliments, by offering them praise, by showing them tons of affection, by basically elevating them into the heavens. And once they create this strong attachment, they tend to withdraw. So it's a push and pull effect. And I have experienced this in my own life, and I will go into the details in a bit on that. And I've seen many other men experience this too. And in much rarer instances, I've seen women experience it. And there are two types in my own mind of this paradigm. I'm theory crafting here, admittedly, but there are two types: the hard love bomber and the soft love bomber. The hard love bomber usually has some kind of psychopathic element to her, a type of psychopathy behind it. Or if not psychopathy, some kind of mental disturbance, some kind of mental illness. I got severely love bombed many eons ago myself in the context of a girl I was in a relationship with who had borderline personality disorder. The principle here is overwhelming the person in question with feelings of affection, with praise, with presence, with compliments, and then withdrawing it on the fly when it suits the person's whims. And in the case of hard love bombing, the action is usually calculated. It's usually a tactic that's being employed to create a situation and a system of dependency. And so once the person has been, so to speak, sufficiently infected by the love bomb that's exploded all over him in his psyche, he's then drawn in. And the person who is applying this tactic, and creating this dependency, then yanks the chain away, and the person is left adrift all by himself. And of course, a lot of this has to do with the amount of time exposed to love bombing. But the thing about love bombing is it doesn't have to be a day thing or a week thing or a month thing. It can be a year thing, a 2-year thing, and then boom. And the longer the love bombing goes on, the more the person who is experiencing the love bombing is going to develop a sense of dependency and attachment to the point of neuroticism, the point of endangering himself, indeed, because it creates so much psychological and emotional dependency. The person's normal psychology can be nigh permanently altered. I've seen this in myself. I've seen this in other people. And as to when the chain is yanked, the love bombing ceases, that's up to the love bomber, because the love bomber is making this calculation. When is it most beneficial to me? When is it best for me to do this? It's almost always to exert control. It's almost always to make sure the person stays in place. The obvious consequences of being proverbially bombed to death by love are the following: enormous psychological damage. Sometimes it takes years to repair it. And another side effect is social isolation. The whole point of love bombing is to create this truly unique, powerful emotional bond that is then dissolved on the fly, as it were. And in this process, the individual who is the recipient of the love bomb is isolated away from people he might have been close to, from family members, from friends, etc., etc. And if the love bombing goes on sufficiently long, well, you can guess what happens then. He doesn't really have the friends anymore. He might be estranged from his family. I've seen it happen many, many, many times in individuals who've been love bombed, specifically to men who've been love bombed. I've seen this happen. And they end up not having any friends. They end up not being very close to their family. The family makes inquiries, wondering what's going on, and everything's fine because they're in this so-called honeymoon phase where the female love bomber in question is bombing him with compliments, with praise, with affection. And then boom, the chain is yanked, or perhaps shattered, and he's left adrift and there is no place to go. And what is he supposed to do? Now that is the hard kind of love bombing as I look at it. Again, I'm theory crafting this into hard love bombing and soft love bombing. Hard love bombing being the overt case of psychopathy, of some kind of general psychological problem. In my own case, many moons ago, when I was going out with this borderline girl, a relationship that lasted over 2 years, I got love bombed for approximately half a year, and I was flying on cloud 9, as they say. I was completely attached to this girl. I was in my 20s at the time, and therefore very vulnerable psychologically and physiologically. But the thing about borderline personality disorder is that it is very variable. The people in question, they're overwhelmingly females in this case, that is the people who suffer from borderline, although there are some males, they tend to look at you in the most complete picture of perfection or imperfection. And this is related to the faded painting of love I've talked about in the past. And I also think that's the reason why borderline personality disorder is much more common in females than it is in males. So, theoretically speaking, in terms of the girl I dated many, many winters ago, she saw me in some sort of perfected state, and then when the state was no longer the case, or at least when she no longer perceived me to be perfect, she dropped the love bomb, and I was regarded as someone to be despised. And that was not something that I would regard necessarily as malicious, but rather a function of her own mental illness. So there is some variation, but that's still a form of hard love bombing, because there's something inherently wrong with a person, be it psychopathy or borderline personality disorder, which drives them to do it. Soft love bombing, which again is my own terminology, I'm theory crafting here to explain different positions, is something that I think, and this is why I'm arguing that it's actually more common in females, this type of behavior, than it is in men. This sense of elevated perception of the person in question, of the man. Again, I've talked about this in Love's Faded Painting. This idea that the male is this frame and the picture needs to be fitted onto him, and the woman starts off with this fantastic vision of what the man is, which over time fades, becomes degraded, and then she jettisons him. This can lead to withdrawal symptoms which are not as severe as hardcore or hard love bombing, but it nonetheless has an effect, because the woman the whole time was showering him with affection, showering with praise. We all know that women have the ability to sever relationships much more consequentially, much more consistently than men, and be rather unaffected by it, if only because of their tendency to look at things in the form of a film or a picture that's either complete or incomplete. What is the danger for men, in particular for young men, with regards to all of this business of love bombing, be it hard love bombing or soft love bombing? Well, it has to generally be acknowledged by anyone who's looked at this issue that there is no greater source of validation for men than the validation found through women. Yes, men can achieve. Yes, men can have hobbies. Yes, they can get a great score in a game. They can be #1 in Counter-Strike. Sure, it's really motivating. And maybe there are even some men that find that more motivating than women. Even red pill men are mostly motivated by women. They're mostly motivated by the validation they receive through women, be it praise, especially affection. I'm looking at you, male mother need, and things of that nature. And so the abrupt withdrawal of affection, in whatever form of love bombing it might be, can be devastating to men, especially in the case of hard love bombing, precisely for the reasons I've cited. It's calculated, it's intentional, and by the time it happens, a great deal of time is usually elapsed. It's very rare that it's 3 days or a week and then the love bomb ceases. No, it's usually a period of months, sometimes a year. The man's already isolated. He thinks that this is the one, right? And then all of a sudden, boom, he's left all by himself, and he's absolutely devastated because he doesn't have another soul in the world to rely on. And this is why, at the end of the day, I'm making this video, because men are going to always want to pursue relationships with women. It's not just sex that men want. They want emotional intimacy. They want that male mother need fulfilled. And in turn, they're going to undertake certain risks, obviously, and this is one of these risks. There are people out there, both men and women, but specifically I'm talking about women in this context, who will engage in this type of behavior. There are the overt, hard love bombers and the soft love bombers. In general, I think women overwhelmingly tend to commit to this behavior more, if only because soft love bombing starts out from an idealized form of the man, a vision of what the man is supposed to be. Afterwards, that vision is dropped because the man can't possibly live up to the ideal because he never was it to begin with. And so that in itself, to my mind, in my interpretation, is a type of soft love bombing. But again, even more devastating is this hard love bombing that I've seen many men fall victim to, and they're left absolutely devastated in the wake of it. It's a very dangerous type of behavior. It's not something that people typically talk about in the manosphere, because as I stated in the beginning, we generally focus on micro phenomena, things in the form of anecdotes, stories, experiences, or macro phenomena. What's the divorce rate in this country? How do women interact? What are their mating strategies? Not so much the things that are in between the macro and the micro, the meso. So I hope this video has been helpful. If you are going to pursue women, I think it's something that you should be aware of, because these women do exist. They will do this to you, particularly the ones who are actually mentally disturbed rather than your standard woman. Anyway, enjoy your forthcoming weekend, and if I'm still alive, I will check you out at a later date. May the gods watch over you, and bye-bye. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.